It really is a joy to welcome you to Pulse this evening here at Cathedral of Hope. And this is a worship service that we do every Wednesday evening, but tonight is a little different and perhaps even more special. We want to welcome you, especially if you're here for the very first time this night. We also want to welcome you regardless of where you are on your spiritual journey. Whilst Cathedral of Hope United Church of Christ is a congregation that is unashamedly reclaiming Christianity for the world and for Dallas, Texas, we're also a congregation that respects wherever people are. So wherever you are on that journey, you're in safe space this evening. And invite you to reinterpret, to reframe, to re-understand, to reimagine, to retune, whatever it is that you need to do to make this good news available to yourself. You see, that's what spirituality is all about. It's not about us telling you what to believe. It's about allowing the Holy to be present within you. And so we want you to have permission this evening to do whatever you need to do to get out of this experience, whatever you need to get out of it. That's our responsibility, each and every one of us as individuals. But we want to know that you are welcome in this place. Usually on a Wednesday night, we would also be serving communion. We are going to do that this evening, but we're going to do it at the end of worship because we want to make sure that we respect that folks who are amongst us who perhaps don't come from that tradition. So if you are needing communion this evening, after worship is finished, there'll be ministers available at the communion table. You're free to come and to share in a small act of communion. We also want you to know that Pulse Cafe will be on this evening, and it will be in the fellowship hall. And you are also able to meet with Brian McLaren after worship this evening to have your book signed. And if you didn't pick up your book already, or if you haven't purchased it, you can do in the bookstore. It will be open all the way through this evening, and there is a special discount on the book this evening. So you don't want to miss out on that opportunity. You certainly don't want to miss out on hearing this incredible man. I'm so delighted to be able to welcome Brian McLaren here to Cathedral of Hope. He is a spiritual warrior. He is someone who has been on quite the journey over his life and ministry, and shares that through a number of testimonies and through a number of books. But this book, The Great Spiritual Migration, is reportedly, and I would agree, probably the finest book that he has written to date. And I say to date because God is not finished with him yet, and there is still yet more to come from him. I'm excited. I know you're excited. You don't need to hear anything else from me. For those of you who are new, I'm Reverend Cazares-Thomas. I happen to be the senior pastor of this congregation, but we believe in this place that we are all ministers and gifted for the purpose of allowing God to shine through us. We're going to allow God to shine through Brian this evening. Please welcome Brian McLaren.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I am so happy to be here. Can I just say, I really like your church. This is my second time here. I just feel so at home. If I lived in Dallas, I know where I'd be on a weekly basis. And I love your pastor. Nice work getting this guy. And I met your new pastor here, and what a beautiful thing is happening here. I got on a plane a week ago Monday and went to Seattle, Washington, and then on Tuesday I went to Portland, and then on Wednesday I went to San Francisco, and then on Thursday I went to Los Angeles, and on Friday I went to San Diego. Actually, I missed some place in there. Anyhow, I was there. Then from there I went to Phoenix, and from there to Denver. And I woke up in Denver this morning, and I get to be here with you tonight. And I'm on this book tour. I never thought I would get to be a writer. My plan was to be an English teacher, and what got me going to be an English teacher was when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I read a book that kind of changed my life. It was a work of adolescent fiction. And I bet some of you here have read it. Did any of you ever read the book, My Side of the Mountain? Anybody here ever read that book? Some of you? So look, this is, you know what adolescent fiction is, right? It's for teens and preteens. And it's a book about a boy, maybe 14 years old, who runs away from home in New York City and goes and lives in the forest. And for a year, he lives on his own in the forest. And he makes friends with a weasel. And he tames a falcon, and he eats roots and berries and makes a house in a tree, and it's just a wonderful story. Now, I don't know what it was. I was a little boy who grew up in a fundamentalist Christian house. You know what that means? If any of you don't know what that means, thank God you don't know what it means necessarily. But I grew up in a fundamentalist home, and at the time I didn't know why reading that book would be so important to me. But can you see why a boy growing up in a home like that might have dreams about running away? But it's not just that. It's that all of us, when we were that age, we were having to imagine leaving the life that, in a sense, we inherited from our parents and making it our own. You know what I'm saying? And so it makes perfect sense that a popular book for pre-adolescence would be a book about going and making your own life, finding your own identity. In fact, that image of going into the woods is really about going into your own interior, the darkness and depth of your own life, finding out who you are. I can't imagine what making friends with a weasel would be, except getting in touch with the parts of us that are a little weaselly and scary and all the rest, right? And of course, what would taming a falcon suggest? Maybe getting in touch with the spiritual sides of ourselves. I didn't know any of that when I read this book when I was a boy. I just knew that it made me come alive. And if you'd told me after I read that book that someday I'd be a writer and I'd get to write books for other people, I just couldn't have believed it, because I just knew what a difference that made for me. But the fact is, a whole lot of us are trying to figure out how to come into our own, how to be who we are, because we had so many people telling us, you have to be this, you can't be that, you have to fit into this box, you have to fit it into that slot. And then we struggle to figure out who we really are. And it's sort of amazing that a lot of us would end up in a church, because churches were often the places that tried to box us up more than any place else. And we're trying to figure out now, we sort of got the idea that maybe what we sang a few minutes ago, that what God's message to us is really that we're loved and we don't have to be somebody else, but we're loved for who we are. And maybe what churches are supposed to be is not places that try to cram us all into this slot or this box, but they're supposed to be places that invite us out and say, hey, you can be who God made you to be. And so here we are, trying to figure out what went wrong with our religion that jammed so many people into so many boxes, and invite us all, in a sense, to come of age, to be who we are. So that's kind of what brings me here. I'd like to read two little passages tonight from this book that I just wrote, and you'll catch on. Imagine that you just bought a 12-pack of Coke. Each virgin can sits before you, bubbling with a promise of caffeinated, carbonated, carbohydrate-rich pleasure. You remove the first can from the cardboard box and pop it open. You should see how I spelled that. You lift the can to your lips, but the liquid tastes salty and foul. Shocked, you throw it away and open the second can. You take a sip, and immediately spit it out. It tastes like spoiled milk. You open a third can and lift it cautiously to your lips, but don't drink. The smell of carbonated sewage disgusts you. If the fourth and fifth cans greet you with a scent of gasoline and vinegar, how likely is it that you'll open the 6th through 12th cans, each of which has the classic sweet, velvety, tongue-tingling taste you were expecting? Now imagine you call CocaCola customer service and share with them your experience. Customer service says, "Coca-Cola World Headquarters, how may I help you?" You say, "I just bought a 12-pack of Coke that tastes terrible." Customer service says, "I'm sorry to hear that. What color were the cans?" The cans were normal, bright red with white lettering. Customer service, "Well, that's the most important thing. Was the cardboard box sound, the box that contained the 12 cans?" "Yes, the cardboard box is fine. It was the taste that was the problem." "Thanks for calling. I'm glad the cans were red and the box was sturdy. Enjoy Coke and have a nice day." A brand like Coke only has meaning because it is linked to an essential quality or qualities for a soft drink. Taste, not the can. With a politician, policies, effectiveness, and character count, not hairstyle or skin color. With a bicycle, speed, weight, and comfort are paramount, not saddle color. And what are the qualities of Christian faith that really matter, regardless of packaging? Therein lies the trouble. For centuries, Christian faith has been presented as a system of beliefs. The system of beliefs has supported a wide range of unintended consequences, from colonialism to environmental destruction, subordination of women, to stigmatization of LGBT people, anti-Semitism to Islamophobia, clergy pedophilia to white privilege. What would it mean for Christians to rediscover their faith, not as a problematic system of beliefs, but as a just and generous way of life, rooted in contemplation and expressed in action and compassion, that makes amends for its mistakes and is dedicated to beloved community for all? Could Christians migrate from defining their faith as a system of beliefs to expressing it as a loving way of life? Could Christian faith lose the bitter taste of colonialism, exclusion, judgment, hypocrisy, and oppression, and regain the sweet and nourishing flavor of justice, joy, and peace? So I know a little bit about the story of this beautiful congregation, and I got to be here a couple of years ago and be honored as one of the heroes of hope here, which meant so much to me. And whenever anybody asks me about this church, I always say the same thing. I say, I go to a lot of churches, and my time with Cathedral of Hope stands out as one of the most precious worship experiences of my life. Not only because the music was unbelievable and all the, but it was the love that I felt from the people here. What I felt, and I had so many people share just a snippet of their story with me, what I felt here was that so many people had been hurt by religion and religious people. They had tasted some pretty sour stuff. But instead of making them bitter, it made them better. And they decided to not put up with that, but to find something deeper and richer. They went for the real taste of what I think Jesus was about, which was the flavor of love. So when I wrote this book, I wanted to try to explore what I think is happening in the Christian faith. It's happening here in the United States, but I've had the chance, I've been in about only maybe 40, 45 countries, something like that, but I've been in a lot of places around the world, and I've seen this happening in so many different places in different ways, where people are saying, we focused on the can, we focused on the packaging, we focused on the box, and we've not paid enough attention to the contents, to what really it's supposed to be about. So what is the real contents? What is this thing really supposed to be about? A Pharisee came to Jesus and said, "Good teacher, what is the greatest commandment?" And Jesus said to him, "Thou shalt have the correct beliefs. And the second is like it, thou shalt join a denomination that upholds those correct beliefs." Not the gospel. You understand what Jesus said is absolutely stunning. He said the great commandment is, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But here's the real kicker. And the second is like it, which means the second is equal to it. The second is equal in importance. Do you understand what a stunning thing that is to say? You shall love the Lord your God. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. What is the essence? What is the core? Jesus didn't say, hey, listen, I've come to introduce some new beliefs, get rid of the old beliefs, we'll start a new religion and name it after me. It's not what he said. He said, look, I'm here. Come follow me. I'm here to teach you a new way of life. Not a system of beliefs, a way of life. And this is a way of life centered in love. I grew up in very strict churches that were very, firm on their beliefs. And I was on my way out. But through two things, through a very powerful spiritual experience that I had, and through a friend, my life was changed in a positive direction. And the friend really introduced me to Christian faith, not as a system of beliefs, but as a way of life. I'll tell you how it happened. He was a youth leader, and I was not interested in any kind of youth groups or anything. Like I say, I'm on my way out of this whole thing. He asked me to come on a retreat. And so I'd never been on a retreat before. I didn't even know what that was. It sounded like we were going to war or something, but he told me, no, we go away to this camp and we have a lot of games and it's a lot of fun. So I thought, okay, I'll try this out. So I arrive at the church where they have these buses and we're all going to get on buses. And the prettiest girl that I knew was there, and she had her best friend who was a little prettier. And I went and said hi to Debbie, and she introduced me to Ellen, and the three of us, we were together for that whole weekend, and man, I loved retreats. I thought, man, this is great. I want to be part of this youth group if this is what it's about. And Debbie and Ellen and I, we were tight, And we had a lot of fun and all the rest. So the weekend ends, and the buses are at the retreat center, and we're about to get on the buses and come home. And my buddy, who was the youth worker, says, hey, Brian, come here, I want to talk to you. And he had this annoying habit. He'd sort of put his arm around you, and I just made me feel a little creepy. He put his arm around me, and he says, look like you're having a good time this weekend. I said, oh, man, I had an awesome time. Thanks for inviting me. It was unbelievable. He says, yeah, noticed you were hanging around with Debbie and Ellen the whole time. I said, yeah. He said, yeah, before we left, I just wanted to tell you, I'm really kind of disappointed in you. My heart just sank. What do you mean? He said, well, I realized watching you this weekend that you didn't really understand what this youth group is about. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, Brian, you don't know this, but you're a leader. People look to you and they like you and they see you as a leader. He said, and you might not understand this, but what we're trying to do in this youth group is really different. We're trying to create a place in this youth group where everybody matters, where the fat kids matter and the skinny kids matter and the cool kids matter and the nerds matter, where the athletes matter and the out of it kids matter, where everybody matters, and we don't put labels on kids, where everybody matters. And when you came here and you spent your whole weekend with the two best looking girls in the whole place, everybody looked and said, yeah, this is just like everybody else. The cool kids hang out together and leave the rest of us on the outside. Now, can I tell you how I felt at that moment? I was ticked off because I'd had such a good time, and I was so mad at him for raining on my parade. But at the same time, I knew what he was talking about. I knew what he was talking about. And I didn't say anything, even though I was sort of gritting my teeth and I was angry. But I thought, he's right. We need places in this world where everybody matters. We need places where everybody's loved. And so something happened between then and when I made my way to the two buses. And there was a split second. It was just a split second. And Ellen and Debbie got on the first bus, and I got on the second bus. And I remember standing at the front of the long row of benches in the bus, and I looked and I said, who's the loneliest kid on this bus? And I went and said, I'm going to sit next to that person. You know, in a funny way, there was no big theology thing going on at that moment. That's almost when I think maybe I became a Christian. Because at that moment, I got that this is about love. This is nothing wrong with Debbie and Ellen. This is about me. Why am I here? What's this about? Does that make sense? Oh, and in a way, what my youth group leader did for me is he challenged me to think about what it means to be a Christian as a way of life, which is the way of love. You know, there's a really, really famous passage in the New Testament that everybody reads at weddings. You know the passage I'm talking about, 1 Corinthians 13. I don't want to read 1 Corinthians 13. I hope you will read it later if you've never read it. It's not just for weddings anymore. It's actually for life. It's for families, and it's for offices, and it's for churches, and it's for, believe it or not, it's for politics, and it's for all of life. It's about love and how important love is. I want to read you the verse that comes right before that famous passage that nobody ever reads, and the one that comes right after that passage that nobody ever reads. Here's the one that comes before. And now I will show you the most excellent way. That little three-letter word, way. I will show you the most excellent way. And then he starts talking about love. He talks about love for a bunch of verses and says a lot of beautiful and poetic and challenging things. And then when he's done, here's what he says. Follow the way of love. I will show you the most excellent way. Follow the way of love. So, brothers and sisters, what it strikes me when you're thinking about the power of one person with love in his or her heart is the power to bring about real change in this world. But here's the problem. Our religion, if you call yourself a Christian, if you don't, that's great, God bless you. You probably have good reasons for not doing so. But if you call yourself a Christian, our religion has been about checking everybody's beliefs. We've become kind of the belief police. And we've created this whole system where if you don't have the right beliefs, we tell people God's going to torture you forever. God loves you, but if you don't have the right beliefs, you know. And a lot of us are saying, that's not right. We've got to rediscover our faith, not as a system of beliefs, but as a way of life, which is the way of love. I don't know if you ever thought of it before, but you could think of Cathedral of Hope as a studio of love. You know, like you have a yoga studio, and when you go to yoga studio, you don't just take notes on the history of yoga, you actually learn the moves, you know? If you go to an art studio, you don't just hear a lecture about Rembrandt, you actually get out paints and you might paint, or you might get out some rock and do a sculpture. You actually do stuff, you practice stuff. And kind of the goal of being part of a congregation like this is that you actually learn how to do the art of love, the way of love in your daily life. Does that make sense? A dance studio, you stand in front of a mirror so you can actually see how you look. So there's a sense, you know, we come here and we think, how am I doing at learning how to love? To love, can I tell you, if you ask me for a curriculum for the studio of love, this might surprise you, but I wouldn't put loving God first. I'll tell you why in a second, but I would first, in this curriculum for the studio of love, first I would put loving your neighbor. And your neighbor means the people closest to you, but it also means those people that we exclude or look down upon or you know, put on the outer periphery of our lives, that we actually learn how to see them as human beings too and love them. Even as far as our enemies, to love other people. And I would start there. Because as we learn to love other people and see all their imperfections, that will prepare us. That's love 101. It will prepare us for love 201, which is to learn to love ourselves. Now you might say, well, why don't we start with ourselves? Well, you could if you want. I wouldn't argue with you. But I'll tell you something. In the process of loving others, you find out they have a whole lot of faults. And sometimes that makes you more ready to say, I wonder if I have any of those. you know? And you learn they have great strengths. And it's almost as, at least for me, in learning to love other people, I'm able to almost get a little distance from myself and see, I'm just like anybody else. I'm a mixture of strengths and weaknesses, you know. I had a very powerful moment in my life. I was a pastor for 24 years, and I was out running, which, you know, I always hate. Like, as soon as I run, my lungs start saying, you've done enough, you know, stop. But I try to do it, and so I was out running, and as I was running, this thought came to me. And here was the thought. You're nicer to everybody else than you are to yourself. If somebody else makes a mistake, you say, it's okay, don't worry about it. If you make a mistake, you beat yourself up for hours. It was funny. It was from loving other people that I was able to see that I wasn't being very good to myself. I know none of you have that problem. Learn to love God. Learn to love yourself. Third, I think if Jesus were here today, I think he would say it this way. If you love your neighbor, you love yourself, you better learn to love the earth. Because if you want your neighbor to be able to breathe and you want to be able to breathe, you both need air. And if you want your neighbor to be able to drink and you want to be able to drink, you both need water. And if you'd like both of you to be able to eat, it would be nice for there to be soil and plants and honeybees and all. You understand? And loving the earth is necessary for loving each other, especially in a time when we're destroying the earth. And loving the earth. That would be love 301. And then would come love 401. And that's where I would talk about loving God. And here's why I put it last. Not because it's least important, but because I think if you love your neighbor and yourself and the earth, you will have already come to love God. Because you will have encountered God in your neighbor. And the love that you love yourself with when you're gracious to yourself will be the love of God. And the love that you love the earth, in a sense, God loves the earth. And you'll be sort of joining God in loving the earth, you know. Wow, what a beautiful stream. And God's saying, well, you finally noticed. I feel the same way. Let's love this stream together, you know. And so then God's face will be a familiar face. Does that make sense? So this to me is the great opportunity of a time like this when we see a lot of people in God's name doing a lot of really terrible and stupid things, hateful things, mean-spirited things in God's name, as if God loved Christians and not Muslims, or as if God loved straight people and not gay people, or gay people and not trans people, or white people and not people of color, whatever. We just got to get beyond all that, amen? And we got to understand, if we don't learn the way of love, let's not call it Christianity. So my hope is that, when I write something and you sort of send a book off into the world, it's like sending a kid off to kindergarten. You hope he does okay and doesn't get beat up by the bullies and stuff like that. But my hope is that a whole lot of Christians around feel like something's wrong. And that we'll say, you know what, this is our opportunity. Not to complain about other people who don't get it. My dear friend, Father Richard Rohr, Franciscan brother, says the best critique of the bad is the practice of the better. So instead of moaning too much about how some other people are messing things up, my hope is that we could decide we're going to get on the way of love. And that, to me, is the beginning of a great spiritual migration. Amen? Amen. Thank you very much.